Yeah, I'll be talking for some 20-25 minutes, and then I hope I have provoked you for a number of questions so we can have a joint discussion afterwards. I am going to talk about resistance, and particularly when it comes to unarmed resistance. And I'm very interested in how people's movements or ordinary people in social struggles are trying to change their societies, the oppression they're living under, dictatorships or what it is. When that happens in liberal democracies or when that happens in authoritarian societies. I'm very interested in how that happens, what kind of experiences that exist, what kind of lessons we can learn, strategies. With resistance, I mean everything that is in some way undermining a dominant relationship. Everything that undermines dominance would be counted as resistance for me. Also, the attempt of undermining domination would be something I would see as resistance. You're not always successful. So you would have then, within the area of resistance, a lot of different things. You would find violent resistance, of course, and unarmed resistance as well. As ordinary protests, demonstrations, workers' strikes, occupations, blockades of roads, civil disobedience, sit-ins, teachings, number of different things, boycotts, right? So many different things could be counted as resistance. Sometimes that is done on a more individual, informal level, maybe at the workplace or within the family, against patriarchy, sexism, and racism that you encounter within your everyday relations when you're trying to undermine the kind of injustices that you're meeting. Or it might be more organized. It might be something that happens in social movements. It might even sometimes be something that takes the form of overthrowing the government, a revolution. So, it's a broad area. Resistance is a theme, but an underlying theme is also something that I think we should reflect more upon, and that is the idea of engaged academics. Academics that are concerned, responsible, and taking their values serious and engage as citizens as a result of their work as academics, the research that they do. So they are engaged both as citizens and academics. So I'll give examples of that, and I think maybe I can provoke around that as well. There is this common understanding within social science that it should try to behave like natural science, that it should be disinterested, that it should be value-free. But I'm very much thinking that that is not only impossible, but it's also dangerous. Because the risk is that we become uninteresting and valueless, worthless in our role. Okay, so maybe I should say something about who I am also. You know, when you buy something at the shop, there is a declaration of the ingredients. You should always ask that of your professor, where you're coming from. It helps you to have more critical take. I am today a professor here at Amherst. I just recently started. My tenure is in place. I am an endowed chair in the study of nonviolent direct action. and civil resistance. So I have it as my job here to study resistance. I'm also the leader of a resistance studies research program in Sweden, in Gothenburg University, where a number of people, including PhD students and senior researchers, are looking on examples of resistance in Cambodia, Japan, Burma, India, Palestine, Egypt, and we're trying to understand what are people doing and what kind of effects are this resistance having. So I work both in Sweden and United States. But I arrived here and become that kind of researcher on resistance with a background where my family has been a kind of a, well, I think you could say a hippie family with some strange values and ideas that influenced me quite a bit, with meditation and yoga and so on. I often describe it as I'm grown up in a vegetarian dictatorship. So I learned to make resistance early on. When I was running away from my mother in the shop and grabbed a sausage in the shop and started to eat standing on the floor, I was only 5 years old. And the butcher in the shop, he was really happy because he knew that we were vegetarians, and it was very unusual at this time in 1968. So he offered generously to give the sausage to us, and we didn't have to pay. But my mother was really upset, and she wanted to pay for these pieces of dead body that I had been eating up. So, no, my parents were loving and caring. It's just that it felt like a dictatorship for me. My grandfather, he was a trade union activist, but also a soldier, a professional soldier. And during the Second World War, he refused to follow the orders of his commanders. So when there came Jews from Denmark trying to flee the Nazi occupation, he let the Jews come into Sweden despite that the orders were to turn them back. So he went into military prison for that. And I think that kind of courage, that kind of individual responsibility has been something that has had an influence on me. My father was refusing to go to the military. In Sweden we have conscription, so everyone, man, has to go. At least it was that until a couple of years ago. So my father refused, and my grandfather was, of course, incredibly upset that his son refused to go to the military, so he refused to speak to his son for a long period. But my father was a staunch pacifist, so I got to know about Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and all that. So around 1980 I started to become active in a lot of movements, environmental movements, in issues around Palestine, work against the apartheid system in South Africa, anti-militarism, working against nuclear weapons, and the weapon production in Sweden. You might not know much about Sweden. I hope you know where it is in the world. But I noticed that in the United States there is some kind of romantic idea what Sweden is, this kind of social welfare and so much of a promised land, while people on the other side of the political spectrum would see Sweden more or less as North Korea. But the thing is that things have changed a lot in Sweden, and it's not really like the story says. Among different things, I could just say that Sweden is among the 10 biggest weapon exporters in the world. It's a very tiny country, only 9 million people, but we are among the 10 biggest exporters of weapons If you count per capita, it's the biggest in the world. So, there were reasons for me to engage in issues that had to do with weapon trade. I was also working with refugee rights, giving protection for refugees that were in danger of being deported from Sweden, that were in hiding. Worked against nuclear power and so on. So I've been engaged in many different movements, okay? Notorious professional activist, you could say. One of those people that went around with a t-shirt saying, "Don't complain on me, it's my job to protest." But this also led me to a number of trials because of civil disobedience. And I've been in prison for more than a year. I've been called a peace terrorist by the media in Sweden. I've been deported from Israel and I can't return 10 years from now. So there's also been consequences for the kind of work that I have done. But I have been focused on learning about resistance, and it surprises me that it is then possible, and I'm really happy that it is possible to actually have a position as an endowed chair and professor in that today. And I think that is giving reason to reflection, which I will do now. So, why is then resistance interesting to do research around? Well, I would say to begin with, there's a reason that has to do with the results. If you're looking on the last kind of 3 decades or so, we have seen astonishing results from popular movements, unarmed resistance by ordinary people. As a matter of fact, you might have heard about the concept of the third wave of democratization. That is more or less totally a result from ordinary people like you, students, workers, and others in societies that have overthrown dictatorships around in the world. As we are seeing right now happening in Hong Kong, which is probably not going to be successful this time, but people are trying. It's going to be one of these resistance occasions that eventually will force even Beijing to democratize. I'm convinced. It might take time. So, depending a little bit how you count what is actually unarmed, because there's always incidences of violence, that groups using violence at the same time as most people will be doing massive civil disobedience protests, demonstrations around in different areas. And how far you're going back in history, but if you go back like 30, 40 years, there are at least some 40 cases where ordinary people are overthrowing regimes, even militarized regimes, heavily militarized regimes that are overthrown by unarmed populations. So examples of that is not what you have seen recently in the so-called Arab uprising in Northern Africa and the Middle East, in Tunisia, Egypt, and so on. But that is actually just part of that long-term trend. What we have seen is the democratization of South Africa. We have seen how Indonesia and the Philippines have overthrown their governments. We have seen how that has happened in Chile. We have seen how that has happened in a number of other West African countries. We have seen how that has happened and of course in India with Gandhi. We have seen how that has happened in Nepal. We have seen how it has happened in the whole Eastern Europe. Poland, Czechoslovakia, East Germany. It wasn't because of military resistance, it wasn't because of invasion, it was because of unarmed, massive demonstrations, strikes, civil disobedience, non-cooperation by ordinary people. So, that's the first reason why we need research on resistance, because obviously it seems to have tremendous effects on the world, even the geographic map of what we're seeing. and that people's real life in terms of increased democratization and liberation. But there are also other reasons why we need an increased research on resistance like this kind, the unarmed popular resistance. It's because also that most research that we see is funded and driven by military organizations and money, corporations or governments that don't have a particularly very much interest in understanding resistance. If they have, it's for controlling it. So it's up to the academics to do it. It's not going to be these very big universities and research funds that will come from military corporations or governments that are interested in promoting this. It has to be done anyhow by initiatives of academics themselves. And there is further reasons that if you look on the activists, maybe the activists in Hong Kong right now, or the activists in Egypt, there are in very difficult problems because they overthrow one entrenched military dictatorship just to see that they entered into the backlash of a new version, a new leader, the new militarized government. So these activists, they're preoccupied by surviving, mobilizing the next action, supporting those people that are killed, tortured, or ending up in prison. They need to get help because they don't have the kind of time for reading, doing long-term strategizing, investigating similar cases and learning from these. They will have very often limited possibilities to travel even. Furthermore, we have the problem that a number of people that are intellectuals in our societies, and that is in the United States as well as in Sweden, that calls themselves liberals, radicals, or critical, and that's including within the academia, tend to focus on criticizing the existing system as it is. Criticizing injustices, criticizing and bringing forward problems that we're living with that has to do with war, injustices, and has to do with militarization, poverty, and all that. And all that is necessary to do. However, it's a different thing to say, how do we resist so that we create social change? It's a whole other set of questions. So it's not enough to criticize and say that we're living in a society that is, through climate change, on the way trying to destroy itself. It's not enough to say that we are having a problem in the world, that a majority of people are in poverty, while there are 1% of people that have so much money they don't know what to do with that money. It's not enough to bring up the problems of the militarization that we're seeing. It's not enough to show the problems of racism and sexism in our societies. We have to also study how do we collaborate, find strategies, effective, innovative, creative methods to actually do change here. What could we learn from mistakes that have been done in places? What could we learn from that there has been mobilizations of unarmed resistance in Palestine that failed, and now we see how armed resistance is getting more legitimacy because the unarmed resistance has proved to not be very effective. Well, on the other hand, the armed resistance is also not proving to be very effective either, but you see the problem. The same with the students 89 in China. What could we learn from that? In what way could we give advice to the students in Hong Kong today? I think that's kind of a moral responsibility. It's something we should have ideas about. We should have particular ideas about. And the last reason I would like to bring up is that if you compare with violent means that we are very used to are being propagated by governments, corporations, military, states around in the world. We have a lot of knowledge. Here we will have research that is advanced. We will have resources. We will have a lot of professionals that are specialized in different knowledge here. We will have institutions. Both when it comes to understanding war, meaning the kind of violence that we or our governments would support, and also when it comes to counterinsurgency in dealing with the kind of violence that we are trying to stop from the terrorists. So that feeds a lot of resources, research, and professionalization, recommendations, even exercises and attempts of developing knowledge about that. But why don't we have the same when it comes to unarmed resistance? Why is it that there is no academia in the world where the Burmese friends I have, or in Western Sahara, or the people in Palestine could go and they could get training, professional training, I mean at least for half the time as ordinary soldiers are getting, where they could learn how to do these kind of resistance more effectively, where they could learn all the different experiences from other struggles. Well, it's obviously not going to happen if we are waiting for that the initiative is coming from governments, corporations, or the military. It has to come from somewhere else. And I think that the only place where it will come is the same place from where this kind of resistance is coming, and that's from the civil society. And academics should be, are part of that civil society, and we should take our own responsibility. So that's why I think it's really up to us to develop this kind of knowledge, and it's urgent. And there are tremendous possibilities, since what we're seeing happening with the overthrows that I've mentioned through the history with the third wave of democratization, that is happening basically without that people have even the kind of more easy, fundamental knowledge about the methods. They are learning a little bit from somewhere and they are experimenting. But they don't have the systematic knowledge comparing different cases, what kind of methods or strategies that have been working in that type of context. That kind of knowledge these organizers don't have. They have a lot of courage. They're ready to take the risks. Okay, so then I want to say something about how it has been for me in developing that kind of knowledge. And then I can say that for me, I have seen how there has been a two-way process where resistance and research has been feeding each other. And the first example I want to give is how resistance can stimulate how resistance can stimulate research. And that is then that when I have been in my own activities within these different movements that I mentioned, when I had encountered problems that I'm sure you also can recognize if you have been active in various groups, is that there are a lot of activities but not so much of evaluations. There are lots of frustration, or I encountered that with lack of effectiveness with the different campaigns, where you do a lot of things and there are a lot of hopes, but the results are difficult to see. I also encountered even that there were groups where I was engaged that were calling themselves anti-authoritarian and feminist, socialist, whatever, but I could see how they were reproducing a lot of that kind of hierarchies within the same group, where new forms of, you could say, elitism or sectarian tendencies were developing because people were blind for other forms of dominance within the movement, or preoccupied by fighting against something and forgetting about other things. You know, the classical example is that the workers' movement historically has been male dominant, but we have also seen how, for example, the early feminist movement has been dominated by Western feminists that have been heterosexuals. So that's been criticized, of course, from feminists coming from the global south that are not identifying themselves as heterosexuals. So these kind of exclusions are happening all the time. So my experience has been then that the frustrations I have felt drove me to the point that I needed to, for my own sake, do research to understand why is this happening and is it possible to avoid? Could we be more effective? Could we find ways that are building on the experiences of other movements in a more coherent way? And then when I ended up in prison for one of the periods I was inside, I had a lot of time to read. So I was working on my PhD and wrote one of the chapters dealing with power systems, Foucault's power system. I don't know if you have read that, but if you have, you would recognize the power technique of panopticon. So I was living inside of a panopticon at the same time as I was writing that chapter in my PhD. And that helped me very much to combine research with my own activism. And so my point is that frustrations with and your experiences with activism can lead you towards interest for doing research on resistance. But it can also be the other way around, where your knowledge that you develop about other activities can inspire you to think new when it comes to the activism. So during my research, I learned about one of the forms of, just as an example, one of the forms of activism that was done by groups in the 70s and so on. They were constructing something called a dilemma action. A dilemma action is a particular kind of action where you construct the situation in such a way that your opponent, the police, the government, the military, or who that is, in that particular situation, they will face a situation because of the way that the activists are doing it, that whatever they do, they will be failing. So if they react against the activists and arrest them and put them in prison, that will look bad. If they don't react, if they let the people continue to do what they're doing without arresting them, it will also look bad. So the activists would create a dilemma which will create a situation where the activists will win whatever the other side is doing. That sounds like a dream thing for any activist. It's difficult to construct. But we were a couple of people in 2008 that were thinking about the situation in Gaza. The long-term blockade against 1.5 million people living in Gaza, that was, as you know, bombed heavily during this summer. The majority of those people in Gaza are people like you, young people. Actually, the majority is under 20. We were thinking about the humanitarian catastrophe that was existing in Gaza, according to United Nations, Red Cross, United Nations Development Agency, Human Rights Watch, whatever kind of organization you want to look at. If it's not an organization from Israel, then all of them would say there's a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. So we were looking on what could you do? What could you do when the pretext is that the boycott is happening because there are terrorists in Gaza? And there are, of course, terrorists in Gaza. That's true. But that the boycott is happening because of the terrorists. And that there is a humanitarian catastrophe ongoing. And the whole area is closed. What could you do? So we came up with a dilemma action. I don't know if you've heard about the Freedom Flotilla to Gaza. But there were a number of organizations around in Europe and also including the United States. Jews, together with Muslims, together with secular people coming from some 14 or 15 countries, were putting together a big armada of boats. Well, as much as we could. 6 or 7 boats. One of the boats were really big, taking several hundred people on board. So the idea was to sail with unarmed solidarity workers, human rights active people that did not have any arms with them, that had humanitarian support with them in the boats, and sail openly. After having press conferences where people were invited to inspect the ships, and where the things being brought were things that people asked for in Gaza, and where the things would be delivered not to Hamas, the controversial group ruling over Gaza, that are branded as terrorists, which we could debate. I don't think it's a correct description. But anyway, we decided to not collaborate with Hamas because they were seen as they were. So we collaborated with independent organizations. The human rights organization, the similar organization to the International Red Cross that exists in the Muslim world, the Red Crescent. So we would give our humanitarian aid to them so that they could distribute to people, not according to if they were belonging to one or the other political fraction, but because they were needing things. Because there were kids that needed footballs to play football. Or there were people that needed wheelchairs because they were not able to walk because of what's been happening with the attacks. Or there were people that needed medicine because there wasn't enough of medicine. Or there were people that needed books to read for their kids because they didn't have enough of it. Because there's a lack of everything, right? Particularly hope. There's a lack of hope. But we couldn't bring that so clearly, but we could at least tried to bring that by doing this international solidarity thing. So the thing was, we were sailing openly with a humanitarian transport directly to Gaza. You know, there is direct water from international water into Gaza. You don't have to pass any Israeli territory. We said, if United Nations want to inspect the ships, feel free to do it. But we will not obey the orders of the Israeli army, and we're going to break the blockade. Peacefully, disobedient. So what should then Israel do? If they were letting us through, we would break the blockade. We will be the first one doing a mass-scale breaking of the blockade. If they attacked the ships, arrested people, they would attack and arrest international people that were unarmed, that were delivering footballs, wheelchairs, and all that. And that would not look good in media. That was the situation. So the Israeli government, they were in night meetings. They didn't know what to do. There's even a quote from a representative to a press conference saying that whatever we do, we will be the bad guys. And something went really wrong. And there are theories about why. But something went really wrong. Choosing between doing one bad thing and another bad thing, Israel happened to choose something even a lot worse. They did not only attack the ships with military force, they killed 10 people. So that was a major scandal, an international news. One of the few times ever the United States avoided putting in a veto in the Security Council. So the Security Council adopted a strong statement criticizing Israel for what they had done. There were condemnations all over the whole world. Very unusual. So, that is a dilemma action. constructed from people that have been studying how to do resistance. So the last thing I will mention, we will just have in the background, and then after that there is questions. It's the academic seminar blockades, and this is an example of what is my dream. It's not where activism is leading to research or research is leading to activism. This is where you bring together research and activism into one thing. The academic seminar blockades is a unique thing that happened in 2007 in Scotland. We were a couple of academics around in the world, some 50 people, that invited people to come and present about nuclear weapons at a conference in Glasgow, Scotland. Outside Glasgow, 1 hour outside, there is the biggest nuclear weapon base in United Kingdom. That was one of the things that were very controversial now with the referendum in Scotland. That I guess you have followed? Or maybe not. That's where the nuclear weapons are. The 4 Trident nuclear submarines that the United Kingdom is having, they are there at that base. So we invited for a conference people that were from international law or physics or biology or social science of different forms, political science, sociology, international relations, were studying nuclear weapons and were critical to the deployment, use, or value of nuclear weapons. So we would have a conference discussing that problem and see what we could do. But we did not invite people to come to the university in Glasgow. We invited people to come to the base. And we had the conference there, in like any kind of conference, with discussion groups, program, lunch, name tags, papers, students and professors mixing. At the same time as we were discussing our papers, you know, it can be very boring, a lot of academics are paid to write and speak long. You know all about that. We could bore a whole world. But the thing was that we were doing that on the ground of the base. So we were blockading the base at the same time as we were talking. So it was an academic conference where we came to our conclusions in our academic papers that, for example, nuclear weapons are, according to international law, illegal to use. We were presenting papers that even when you don't use it, there are radioactive emissions that are a problem for people that manage them. Depleted uranium that is being used in all kinds of wars, which are parts of uranium being used in conventional weapons, are creating a lot of cancer. These kind of reports were presented. So people are then presenting this and also taking their responsibility of their conclusions, acting in civil disobedience, and we were closing the base. And the police were standing around, didn't know what to do. They thought we would stop, but then they didn't count on the endurance of talking professors and students. So you will see some night pictures here, because we were doing it the whole day. They decided to arrest everyone at the night. So what I'm going to do here is let these pictures just pass through here as we're talking. These pictures are giving some ideas of the people that were there and that academic seminar blockade. That's a Sir Richard Jolly from United Kingdom that took part, and he said to me that I'm so happy that finally I'm going to be in prison. He had met so many people in the third world, in the global south, that had been imprisoned because of their part in the liberation struggles, the anti-colonial struggles. But now he was old and he felt like he's never really taken any risk for what he believed in. So now he would do that. So we had a great academic seminar, you could say, in this police cell. I was in the police cell together with him as a development researcher, and then an anthropologist, Justin Kendrick, So we three were sitting and discussing in the cell so intensively. So when the police was, or the guard, at the police station where we were held for just over the night, was opening the door and asking if we wanted to have something to eat. Then Richard said, you know, Sir, Professor Richard Jolly, he was used to have people that were helping him with everything. So he said, oh, no, not now, we're talking, we can take it later. And then me and Justin that have been inside before, we said that, Richard, either we take food now, or there won't be any food until breakfast tomorrow, all right? Okay, so we took some food. But we had really good discussions there. It was like, you know, a post-seminar discussion after the conference. So the students were having these plastic things where you're holding hands. You can have chains even inside, so it's difficult to break the blockade. It takes time to cut through without hurting people. People were getting cold. As is police station, some people are being let out. Yeah, okay, so that's basically what I wanted to say. I have two questions to you. But you can ask me any questions you want. But what I would like to ask you is, why is it so few academics that are engaging themselves in this kind of knowledge search, resistance research? Academics are often having very secure positions. There's academic freedom. And there are all kinds of resources where you could do things, but very few are actually doing this. And they're devoting their time and energy to other kinds of things. I would like to hear your opinions on that. Why is it so few doing that? And then you will probably have questions, so feel free. And I hope that you have provoked some of you, that we can start. All right? Yes?
I've heard the saying that if there's no bourgeoisie, there's no revolution. So if you don't have a middle class, you don't have a revolution. Do you count like professorial resistance as part of like a bourgeoisie revolution?
I think the kind of very strict kind of division of society in either working class or bourgeoisie is a bit without nuances today. We have much more complex societies today. We have a lot of differences within the middle class, the bourgeoisie. But yeah, professors are very privileged and are part of groups that would not belong to what we could say the subalterns, the people that are under pressures and being poor, excluded, without work, or counted to whatever we would like to call the people that are living in the shacks in Mumbai, for example. Many of them are not even working, so they're not working class either. So, I think that there is a role to play for the bourgeoisie, the radical parts of it, where I count at least potentially professors. But I don't think there should be a leading role as movement leaders for those people. I think that kind of leadership could be developed from the movements that are coming from below much better. If you look on, for example, the landless movement in Brazil, the MST, they are much better in producing their own leadership. But I think they are also taking advice and collaboration together with urban journalists, lawyers, academics. And I think as part of an alliance, I think, yes, bourgeoisie could also play a role, yes. Yes.
Okay, well, what was your first like movement that you went to, and like what made you decide like this is what I want to do, or this is what I'm meant to do?
Right. If we don't count the action against the vegetarian dictatorship, then I would say it was when we had a referendum in Sweden about nuclear power, 1980. I got engaged in that question about nuclear power and what does it do to our societies in terms of centralization and creating stuff that we don't know how to deal with. And the discussions around renewable energy was important at that time. But it was a wake-up call for me when we had the referendum and the majority of the population were voting for getting rid of nuclear power, but the result was so manipulated by the politicians. So what happened was that we redoubled nuclear power in Sweden, and we are still not getting rid of anything more than 2 nuclear power plants because they're too old and they're too close to Denmark, so they were taken away. So it kind of radicalized me in understanding that, okay, you have to do more, you have to kind of understand this thing with power and so on. So from that, it evolved into other issues. I think activism itself has been a learning process for me. Yes?
I have 2 things. So in class, we were talking about Gandhi and his movement. Why do you think his was so successful?
Well, it was successful in many ways, but it was also a failure in other ways. Gandhi had many ideas of also social reform program for India. He also had ideas about how the democracy could be much more decentralized and close to people to create empowerment of the people in the villages and so on. So all these kind of things were failures. So just to...
Okay.
But I think he was a very shrewd politician. He was, I mean, we understand him as being this religious fanatic that Churchill described as being this half-naked fakir walking around and playing politician. But the thing is that when you look on Gandhi's advices, it was very practical, strategic advices. And he understood how to play the media, for example, already in the 1930s. The design of the campaign against the salt monopoly that the British were having as colonial power, you know, a very crazy idea. You have monopoly on something that is pre-existing in the ocean. Anyway, the British had that monopoly, and they said, no, you're not allowed to create salt. There's a tax on that, and we have that. Then when he was doing that, it was not just to walk out to the water and take salt. It was to create a long march for about a month, going from village to village to village. By that, he was mobilizing people. But by that, he was also creating a drama. You know, like almost if you're seeing a horse race or people running the marathon, who is going to win? What's going to happen? So media got really interested of this. Are the British going to arrest him? Or are they going to let him do this? If they would arrest him, he'll become a martyr and people will be upset that their leader is in prison. If they would not arrest him, he would be able to, in front of everyone, make salt, which would be an illegal act. So, I mean, because of these kind of things, I think he had a lot of crazy ideas. I regard him as having a lot of even personal psychological problems. I'm not a Hindu, I'm not even religious, I'm secular, but I'm very inspired by the strategic genius that Gandhi was showing. He was mobilizing the masses in a way that no one else in India had done before in that way. He literally filled the prisons during campaigns. He broke down the biggest empire the world has seen so far at that time. Yes, I think you were first.
Over this past summer,
Yeah.
Gaza also bombed Israel a lot.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, it's of course unacceptable with sending rockets to civilian targets. That's per definition, I would say, an act of terrorism. Absolutely. But in all kinds of violent exchanges, there is a need for having some form of proportionality. It's even said so in the legal text. That's not my opinion. And I don't think there is a proportionality when it comes to how Israel is treating that kind of rockets that don't even know how to hit its targets because they're very primitive rockets. But of course, for those people living under that kind of bombardment, it is a terror, of course. What we're talking about here is one of the strongest armies in the world. Israel is de facto, I think it's number 4 or 5 in the world. Attacking a population of 1.5 million people living concentrated in an area where there is virtually no place to go, where all the borders are closed, and where these militants are existing naturally where they can do within civilian population. And they are not having an army, they're not having an air force, they're not having a navy. So I think if they would have an air force, I don't think they would send rockets to civilians. They would attack Tel Aviv, like in any kind of war, but they don't have them. So it's a very unequal situation. Which doesn't mean that I'm saying it's right to send the rockets. Absolutely not. I believe that it would be much wiser by the Palestinians to do as they did during the first Intifada, to have an unarmed, mass-organized resistance that is built on disobedience and non-cooperation and boycotts and all that kind of thing. Yes?
Actually, directly related to that, I was wondering what you thought about the BDS movement, where that does sanctions.
In general, I think it's a necessary step to boycott Israel, absolutely. In the same way as the boycott against South Africa was really important to bring South African regime into the negotiation table. There might be aspects of the boycott movement that I am not really agreeing with. It has to do when you're targeting individuals that are ordinary academics. I'm not sure about that. I know that the US campaign is not targeting individual academics. I think it's good to boycott institutions, but not individuals like that. Yes?
Do you think social resistance need a spokesperson to figurehead to be successful at the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King? Because I think that the Occupy Wall Street movement wasn't all that successful, lacked a spokesperson. And maybe, do you think that's true?
I think there are pros and cons of having a spokesperson. If you want to have a specific influence on, let's say, getting a new law, changing a law, or changing a policy, you definitely need a spokesperson. So like the civil rights movement were struggling for a Civil Rights Act that came in 1964. So that was helpful. But I think the Occupy Wall Street needs to be understood in a different way. I think it was very much a success in the way creating a space and experience, particularly for young people, of a different kind of approach to politics. And in terms of networking, we can see that there has been offsprings of debt cancellation campaigns that are very specific, solidarity projects for people that are being evicted from their houses, that are more kind of typical organizations with spokespersons and all that kind of normal agenda. So I think, in my view, the Occupy actually were wise in not immediately producing a spokesperson when they were not ready to formulate what kind of politics they were really doing, but instead creating the space. You know, very often when the media is coming with a microphone, it's very tempting to put someone forward to speak loudly for the group. But then the media is kind of forcing you to create a spokesperson when you're not ready. So I think sometimes you can get a spokesperson too quick. Sometimes movements are getting attention too quick. And I'm impressed by the Occupy Wall Street, that they were, or the number of occupiers that developed, that they were avoiding that. I think it's too early to say if the Occupy movement was a success or a failure. My feeling is that the repercussions, the consequences are still happening. Or maybe I'm an optimist. Yes?
I'm kind of curious about what you think about what's going on in Ferguson right now. Just like in general, like what do you think they could do better?
I don't know enough about
Yeah,
the situation in
they
Ferguson.
seem to be working over there, you know?
Right. I mean, I came to the United States now in August. I've been in the United States several times before, of course, but now I started this position just now.
Oh.
So I don't think I'm informed enough, but as far as I can see, it seems to have been a strong local reaction to a long-felt racist problem that became clear and symbolized by that killing of that young person. But if we just take it as an example, I think it's one of these things that we need to look more into, because the killings have been happening. The police have been killing people both before and after that, but mobilizations are not happening always. And I find it hopeful that there are people reacting and there is mobilization. So why did it happen in Ferguson at that time? That is the kind of specialized research we need to do to learn more about. Yes?
As was mentioned, we were reading about Gandhi, and he was reading. He said that he felt when he was in jail that he was free to read and to think freely without the pressures of the world on his back.
Yeah.
I was just curious what your experiences in prison were under the circumstances that you were sent there.
I put out a book about the experience, but it's in Swedish, unfortunately. It's been very much different kind of feelings. I would say that at times it was really depressing to see how people that were in prison that I was engaging with, and I was often put in like everyone else in a cell where you're sharing the time, and maybe you are with one person and then maybe you go out for half an hour a day. So you spend a lot of time together. You talk a lot. So you kind of get to know the life stories of people. So I found it really depressing to see that there were people sitting there for like 10, 20 years and they could not read. And they came from backgrounds where they've been extremely poor, or parents have been using drugs, a lot of violence, or people that were there because they did something really stupid when they were drunk or something like that, and now they have to spend a long time. One of the things that was really, it's still painful, is what I got close to one person. He was a former alcoholic, and he had lived on the street for many years. And he had no contact with his family and so on. But he had one person, a guy that he was drinking much together with. And one time they were really drunk, and they were starting to get in an argument and fighting with each other. And at least how he tells me, the other guy died out of an accident. It wasn't his intention. But he was blaming himself for killing his only friend so much that he was saying that I deserve to be in life in prison. And he was telling this very tragic story at the same time as I was meeting ex-soldiers. For example, a soldier that been in the UK, in Iraq, where he was telling that he refused to kill unarmed prisoners at some time And then the others in the group that wanted to kill them, because they had to kill them in order to get quickly back to their base, they put him under extreme pressure because they were afraid that he would tell on them that they planned to kill, and they didn't do that because he refused and so on. Anyway, so he became a drug addict when he came back home. I think he never really dared to tell about this story because it was so big and people would not believe someone that is an addict. Yeah, so what I'm saying is that I was seeing so much of people I got close to that were suffering. So I think for me it was a strong experience, and sometimes was really depressing. Sometimes there was also danger, but I realized that I was not really very much in danger because I was keeping out from drugs, and they didn't know where to put me when it came to the hierarchy. You know, there is very strong hierarchy in prison. The bank robbers and the organized criminals, they are at the top. Those that are the lowest are those that have done rapes. And those people that are immediately getting killed, if they are close to the other prisoners, are those that have done rapes of children. So they have to be kept separate. So there's a clear hierarchy. And then you have people in between that have been dealing with marijuana or just been thieving or something, right? But they didn't know where to put me. I was really strange. I mean, I met... just to illustrate, I met, when I was at the gym, I met a guy that came to me when we were standing in the queue because we had to be searched, that we were not bringing any metal with us from the gym into the cell. Came this guy that was, I mean, I'm rather big, but he was double size of me. I mean, he was really big. And he was coming to me like this, and I was saying, hey, are you that guy that was hitting a submarine with a hammer? I've been going to a nuclear submarine and trying to disarm it with a hammer and bolt sacks and so on, together with other people. Plowshares, if you have heard about plowshares, they're also here in the United States. Anyway, he was asking that, and I was saying, yes. And I wasn't really sure if he was upset about this or what he wanted. And he said, cool. You're a fucking terrorist. And I realized that in his vocabulary, that was kind of something he liked. So then he asked me if I had anything to read about anti-militarism and peace stuff and so on. So he wanted to have something to read in himself. So I gave that to him. So, I mean, it is a society. Inside prison is a society. Like everywhere else, with the rules and those in the top and those below, and you have to learn to play the game and understand what's going on. There are people that are artists, there are trade going on. You know, when you buy stuff, it's very often tobacco that is the currency. You don't use money, but you use tobacco as buying sugar or whatever. So there's a whole life going on there that I found fascinating. But having said all this about this kind of, you could say, ethnographic study, where I came as a middle-class privileged from Sweden, I came in contact with the class society in the United Kingdom and poverty and people that were living in desperation. I could also be very politically active inside. I got some 3 to 5 letters every day that people were writing because they were wanting to know about my action and how things were in prison and so on. So I could write every day to these kind of people. I could study, and I could work on my chapter, as I said, for the PhD. So I felt very much active inside. I must say, prison radicalized me. It gave me a different perspective on the rest of society, seeing it from within the prison and looking out. Even though I was clear, I was privileged all the time. I knew lawyers and journalists, I was educated, I had a lot of contacts. I almost said I would recommend people to have the experience of being in prison. But I'm aware that it's a violent place, and it's also something which can be depressing in many ways. So it's not in the way that I want to just say that I recommend it. But I think it's an experience to be in solidarity in an everyday with people that are at the bottom of society. It's an experience. Creates new solidarity links that I felt was really helpful. And I joked with the guards when I was leaving the prison. I said, next time I'm coming, you have to call me professor. And so it is. Yes?
I'm just wondering, what was the result of the academics against this campaign?
That one?
Do you think it was a success?
Well, like many things in life, it was a partial success. The nuclear weapon base is still there. But what happened was that this action with so many academics from around the world that did this and got arrested and also came back and did a new conference some months later, that got a lot of media attention. And it was also happening within a campaign called the Fastlane 365, where the idea was, I think it's a beautiful idea, the idea was to have a lot of different thematic blockades. So it would be people locally from one area that came and blockaded for a day. Or it would be nurses coming and blockading for a day. Or it would be teachers coming and blockading for a day. Or it would be Quakers coming in. You get the idea, right? So that was quite powerful. Many people got arrested, many people were speaking about it, so it got some really strong attention and also grassroots discussion within Scotland. So after this, the election result that happened a couple of months after the campaign here gave the majority to the Scottish Nationalist Party, that is not a right-wing party, but a left-wing party, a we could say social democratic, like the Democrats here. But they were running on an anti-nuclear weapon agenda. So you could say that it had a strong result in that sense. That from that developed the idea that Scotland should ask London to take back the nuclear weapons, because the opinion polls are very clear. The Scottish people don't want the nuclear weapons, and particularly not inside of Scotland. So, from that period at least, there has been a pressure from Scotland on London to get rid of these nuclear weapons. So in a sense, it transformed public opinion into the result, but the weapons are still there.
Alrighty, thank you everyone for coming out. Are there any further questions? Yeah?
Thank you.
Oh,
You're welcome to take contact.
Also, everyone, I have a survey on the way out. It is done on a tablet, so if you would like to partake in the survey, it's like 5 quick questions. You just answer them on the tablet really quickly, and I'll give you a raffle ticket, and we have a really awesome prize that we'll draw for at the end of the week. So if you'd like to participate, I'll be at the door.
Great.
So thank you again so much.
Sure. I just want to say that if people are thinking about maybe they want to write some work, some thesis that are dealing with these kind of issues, you're welcome to contact me, and we can just meet at my office. I'm easy to find at UMass if you look on my French name, Stellan Vinthagen. All right? Take care.
Hi, thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
My name's UMass.
All right. All right. And you are where?
I'm an undergraduate, I'm a senior here. Sticking around for one more year to do a master's.
And you are from
Have you heard of the SEPIC program, Social Political Economy?
No, I'm still,
I know you're
still learning.
down here. So many academics in economics, so public policy, but I didn't ask any questions or anything, but I find your story very interesting. There's a lot more details. Where's your office?
It's in Thompson.
Okay.
With the sociology and political science.
Okay, so you're within the sociology department?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. So you can book time and you can book more. I mean, public policy must be close to what's called in sociology, public sociology, right? I mean, it's about when you are trying to do research that is also geared towards the interest of the public.
I mean, from the program, I know that a lot of people go into a lot of different fields, policy analysis, public policy analysis, things like that. But that's kind of one of the academic side, and I've done a little bit of teaching here undergraduate but I've done some over the past 3 to 4 years now. I've done some organizing on campus, at the statewide level, around a little bit of union work, and then locally I'm with targeting the administration for certain things.
Yeah.
So I would love to sit down and talk sometime, but I'll show you an email.
Send me an email. Yeah, do that.
Yeah, just to find out more about what you're doing.
Yeah. And then I will learn something more about what's happening here at the campus. That's good. All right.
Well, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Sure. Yes, I am. A permanent one also, which is amazing. And I it has to be permanent because I thought that if I don't have a secure position, I might get problems when I do certain things. It's the first time I was in a job interview where my time in prison was actually a part of my CV. No, UMass is good in that sense. I mean, I was even very clearly asking them, okay, so how would you react to this if I can't teach because I'm in prison? And we will be proud. We have to solve that, right? Oh well, of course I will. I'll try to avoid it to affect students, but sometimes you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I'm going to this in February, which is people in Western Sahara, and you never know how the American government will.
First essay for the class is what is true, so that was that was a fun one.
Yes, I only teach during the fall. But then there will be 2 courses every fall, which I will make sure is cross-listed all over the campus once I understand the system how to do it. But these 2 courses will always deal with different aspects of this. Hope that we can spread that, but there are ongoing education and resistance studies here.